I, Alex, have always had a passion that most people just didn't understand. It wasn't football or fishing. It was amateur radio, or ham radio as we call it. I spent all my free time building antennae, running cables, and learning how to communicate with people across the world using just airwaves and some basic equipment. To me, it was a hobby, a challenge, and a guarantee. To my neighbors, it was just plain weird and terribly inconvenient. The main source of ridicule was my front yard. I had a large, tall antenna array that looked like a complicated metal sculpture. It was essential for long-distance communication, but in my perfectly manicured suburban neighborhood, it was seen as an eyesore that ruined the property values. The worst judge was my neighbor, Mr. Dale. He was the kind of person who worried more about property aesthetics than about actual people. He had a perfect lawn and a perfect life, and my antennas ruined his view. I knew that he would become a central problem in my life, but I never knew he would one day become my desperate petitioner, humbled by his own arrogance. Mr. Dale started complaining the moment the largest antenna went up. He sent me official letters from the Homeowners Association, HOA, threatening steep fines for violating the neighborhood's strict aesthetic covenants. He called the antenna an ugly tower of junk and demanded I take it down immediately. He claimed it was reducing the value of his own home. "Alex, this is a respectable neighborhood," he told me one afternoon, shouting across the meticulously trimmed fence line. "We don't live in a communication depot. That monstrosity makes our houses look like we're preparing for the end of the world, and frankly, it is embarrassing." I tried to explain that ham radio was crucial for emergency preparedness. I showed him the battery banks and the small solar panels I had installed on my shed roof. "If the main power grid ever goes down, Mr. Dale, or if the cell towers fail, this is the only way to reach help. This is a lifeline, not a decoration." He just laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that was instantly recognizable across the neighborhood. "A lifeline? We have smartphones. Alex, we have fiber optic cable. You're living in a fantasy land. You're just a doomsday prepper." I ignored the fines and the laughter. I knew the value of my unconventional hobby. I spent every weekend reinforcing my communication shed, making it completely self-sufficient. I installed multiple layers of battery backup, reliable solar charging, and redundant communication paths. I had radios that could reach hundreds of miles without relying on any public infrastructure whatsoever. The judgment didn't stop at Mr. Dale. I stopped receiving invitations to neighborhood barbecues and pool parties. Parents quickly pulled their kids away when they saw them looking too closely at my web of wires. I became known as a weird guy with the crazy antennas. My hobby was a constant source of public ridicule, but the truth was, it was my sanctuary. I had found deep peace in the quiet hum of the radios and the assurance that I could remain functional when others collapsed. Only Mrs. Henderson, an older lady who lived 2 houses down, ever showed any genuine curiosity. She would wave quietly and sometimes leave me a plate of freshly baked cookies. She never judged my passion. She just looked at my setup with genuine respect and an understanding gaze. Months passed, and the ridicule turned into a sort of quiet acceptance, born mostly of resignation. Mr. Dale stopped sending fines because he knew I wouldn't pay them, and the rest of the HOA board didn't want the cost of a formal legal fight. But he made sure everyone knew he still considered my antenna array an eccentric liability that needed to be managed. I finished building my specialized communications shed, sealing it against the weather and installing the final layers of equipment. It was small, sturdy, and entirely off-grid. It was capable of operating indefinitely, regardless of external conditions. The feeling of independence was incredible. I knew that my investment in time and money was worth more than any frivolous property accessory or landscaping project. I used my radios to participate in mandatory training exercises, simulating power outages, and running drills to contact emergency services in other states. The practice was fun, but it was also serious, necessary work. I was training for the one day, the single moment, when every piece of common modern technology would fail. I was ready. Then the crisis hit. It wasn't a fire, a flood, or an earthquake that hit us. It was something far more devastating to modern life, a cascading regional power grid and communications failure. The news reports, which were brief and frantic before the screens went dark, blamed a massive cyber attack combined with simultaneous extreme weather damage across the state. One quiet evening, the lights flickered, buzzed strangely, and then died completely. The whole neighborhood was instantly plunged into absolute darkness and a terrifying silence. At first, everyone assumed it was a standard, temporary power outage. People waited an hour, then two. They tried their smartphones, but the cellular towers were dead, shut down by the lack of power. They tried landlines, but the network was down, too. I walked outside and looked up at the sky. It was strangely quiet. The air conditioning units were silent. The whole technological world had simply ceased to function. I knew instantly that this was not a simple blackout. This was the moment I had prepared for my entire life. The next morning, the severity of the situation became terrifyingly clear. We were completely isolated. No power, no internet, no cell service, no television, and soon no running water in some areas where the municipal pumps relied on electricity. The roads were clear, but there was no way to contact the outside world, no way to find out how far the system failure extended, and no way to call for help. People's powerful, expensive modern gadgets were useless pieces of plastic and glass. Their newer cars, relying heavily on network computers, refused to start. Immediate, deep panic began to set in among the residents. I walked out to my shed. Inside, the lights were on, powered by the massive battery bank, and the quiet solar panels on the roof. My radios were humming softly, waiting for instruction. I tuned into the emergency frequencies. It was chaos. People trying to relay messages over unreliable paths, but the network was still partially functional in distant, unaffected cities. I had a lifeline. I had a way to communicate. I decided to start small and manage expectations. I focused on receiving information first. I set up a small whiteboard on my front porch and wrote down the limited news I could intercept. Grid failure is regional. National Guard mobilized. Do not panic. Conserve resources. The neighbors, still in shock and denial, gathered nervously on the street. They saw the steady light coming from my shed and the information posted on my board. They were astonished. Their powerful, expensive homes were dark and helpless, but the weird guy with the junk tower had light and news. Mr. Dale approached the board, his face pale and drawn. He was holding a completely dead cell phone. He read the notes quickly, his usual arrogance completely gone. He looked like a small child utterly lost in a massive, dark shopping center. He looked at me, standing by the shed door. "Alex," he asked, his voice strained and thin. "How is that even working? Where's the power coming from?" "Solar and batteries." I explained simply, pointing briefly to the roof of the shed. "And the radio network is entirely independent of the internet and cell towers. As I told you before, this is for emergencies. It is completely off-grid." Mr. Dale didn't apologize for his past mockery, but he didn't criticize me either. He just stared at the shed, seeing it now not as an ugly eyesore, but as a source of unimaginable power and stability. He saw his world crumbling into chaos, and he saw my world standing firm and functional. The true test came on the third day. People were running out of necessary medicine, and some elderly residents needed crucial medical attention. There was absolutely no way to know if an ambulance could even reach them in their isolated state. The local police station was overwhelmed and unable to communicate beyond a mile radius, relying on messengers on foot. A young mother, frantic because her child had a high fever and needed antibiotics immediately, rushed up to my door. "Alex, please. You have to help us. Can you call the hospital? Is there any way to tell them we need a doctor right now?" I brought her into the shed. The small room was filled with flashing lights and humming devices. I showed her the radio. "I can't call the hospital directly," I explained. "The local phones are dead, but I can relay a message to a city 50 miles away, where the power is still on. They can call the hospital from there, which is our only hope." It took nearly an hour of careful, slow work, repeating the necessary coordinates and medical details through a tremendous amount of static, but I finally got the message through. The intense relief on the mother's face was instantaneous and profound. From that moment on, the neighborhood's judgment stopped completely. The shed became the official, essential lifeline. The people who had mocked me were now lined up on my driveway, waiting patiently and respectfully for their turn to send a short, desperate message to a relative, a doctor, or emergency services. My hobby was no longer just about me. It was about saving the entire neighborhood from catastrophe. I established a simple system immediately to manage the sudden demand. I prioritized all medical emergencies first, followed by confirmed safety checks for relatives outside the region. I worked tirelessly for days, fueled by the deep satisfaction of using my unique, ridiculed skills for the greater good of the community. My hands, once judged for being dirty from the antenna work, were finally doing the most important work possible. I saw the change in the neighbor's eyes. The cold dismissal was completely replaced by profound respect and overwhelming gratitude. The antennas, once universally hated, were now recognized as necessary symbols of stability and hope. The children, who had been pulled away, now stood quietly by the fence, watching the magic tower work its essential communication functions. Mrs. Henderson, my one quiet supporter, organized a line, bringing me sandwiches and hot coffee. She was my first volunteer, protecting my energy and ensuring strict fairness in the system I had set up. I still hadn't seen Mr. Dale in the line. He was too proud. He stayed inside his perfect silent house, relying only on canned goods and his own failing battery supply. I knew he was watching. I knew the silence of his powerful smartphone was deafening compared to the constant chatter and static of my working radio. I was able to relay news that official help was indeed coming, but the damage was extensive, and it would be days before the full power grid could be safely restored. This confirmed information, usually trivial in the modern world, was absolutely vital in preventing outright panic and potential anarchy in the neighborhood. I learned through one of my official transmissions that my own town's emergency services were prioritizing the hospital and elderly homes, and that external communication was their single biggest obstacle. I immediately volunteered my service, offering to act as a primary neighborhood relay, funneling all local emergency requests directly to their short-range radio unit. I set up a direct link to the fire department headquarters. Using a backup frequency, they kept completely quiet. I became the essential point of contact for my entire neighborhood. I was no longer the weird guy. I was the most essential and trusted man on the block, holding the entire community's safety in my hands. One afternoon, a frantic older man rushed up to my shed. "Alex, it's Mr. Dale's mother-in-law. She lives alone, and she desperately needs insulin. He can't get through to her. He's too proud to ask you himself, but he sent me here. He's desperate and terrified." I looked at the sympathetic neighbor. Mr. Dale, even in this life-or-death scenario, couldn't bring himself to ask the man he mocked for help. The depth of his personal pride was astounding, but the need for medication was agonizingly real. I knew I couldn't deny help based on past, petty insults. "I need the full address and dosage immediately," I said, putting on my headphones. "Tell Mr. Dale that I will try, but he must wait outside the shed. I'll need to confirm the situation with emergency services before I can guarantee anything." It took me nearly an hour to finally cut through the static and relay the urgent medical message to the emergency services team, who confirmed they had a unit near the mother-in-law's address. The critical insulin would be delivered safely. I gave the confirmation to the waiting neighbor and went back to my console, but then I heard slow, heavy footsteps outside the shed door. I looked up and saw Mr. Dale standing there. He was dirty, his perfect polo shirt was wrinkled, and his face was etched with exhaustion and profound shame. He looked like he had aged 10 years and 5 days under the immense pressure. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood in the doorway, watching me calmly manage the complex equipment, watching me speak into the microphone, my voice clear and controlled. He was watching the man he had ridiculed as a failure do the most important job in the community. "I heard you helped Mrs. Gable," Mr. Dale finally said, his voice low and incredibly raspy. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Thank you, Alex. She needed the medication immediately. You saved her life." "I helped because she needed help, Mr. Dale," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "It wasn't personal. It was necessary." He nodded slowly. He fidgeted with his hands, looking up at my towering antenna, which was humming faintly, doing its job perfectly. I came here to tell you, I was wrong. Completely wrong about all of it. About the antennas, about the preparedness, about everything I said. The apology was clearly painful for him. It was a humiliating surrender of his deepest pride, but it felt entirely earned. He had to finally admit that his expensive modern life was utterly useless, and my ridiculed hobby was essential. I don't need your apology, Mr. Dale. I said honestly, I needed your trust months ago, but I need your help now. I need someone organized to manage the line and manage the limited supply of clean water we have left in the neighborhood. Are you willing to help the community you nearly find out of existence? Mr. Dale straightened up slightly. The request for his specific management skills, rather than a refusal, gave him a small piece of his shattered dignity back. Yes, he said immediately. I can organize. I can manage supplies. Just tell me precisely what I need to do. He spent the rest of the day working tirelessly, organizing the neighbors into efficient teams, ensuring fairness, and using his management skills for genuine good. He never complained. He took his orders from the man he had called a lunatic. My unconventional hobby had not only saved his mother-in-law, but had also completely redeemed him. He was no longer the arrogant judge. He was a valuable, humble member of the community. The crisis lasted 8 days. When the first power trucks finally rolled into our street, a collective cheer went up that was louder than any engine. People hugged each other. The lights flickered back on, and the silence was broken by the loud, comforting hum of life returning to normal. The first thing Mr. Dale did when the power returned was walk over to my shed. He was carrying a plate of freshly baked cookies from his kitchen. My wife made these, he said, handing them to me with a small, sincere smile. Thank you, Alex. You saved us all. He looked up at the towering antenna. I'm going to talk to the HOA board immediately. That antenna isn't coming down. It's the most important thing on this street, and I want you to teach me how to use it. Every single thing you know. The transformation of the neighborhood was complete. The ridicule was permanently replaced by genuine respect. I was no longer the weird guy. I was Alex, the hero who knew how to communicate when the world went dark. People started asking me about batteries, solar panels, and emergency kits. The profound shift from judgment to active preparedness was massive and permanent. The irony was sweet. My hobby was now the most respected and valuable activity on Willow Creek Lane. Mrs. Henderson and I were officially honored by the town council for our service during the crisis. I used the small grant money I received to upgrade the neighborhood's communication readiness, helping others install basic receivers and emergency lights. Mr. Dale became my best and most dedicated student. He bought his own equipment, a smaller, more discreet setup, and I taught him everything I knew. He quickly became proficient, focusing his energy on organizing a community emergency network. He used his professional management skills to map out local resources and response teams, becoming an essential volunteer. The judgment he had inflicted had turned into an unexpected lifeline, not just for the community during the crisis, but for Mr. Dale himself, who found purpose in preparedness rather than in shallow property aesthetics. I kept my main antenna array exactly where it was. It stood as a large, permanent reminder of the crisis and the folly of judging what you don't fully understand. It was no longer an eyesore. It was a necessary beacon of safety. The neighborhood, once obsessively focused on appearances, was now focused on stability and resilience. The spirit of self-sufficiency spread quickly. People started learning basic first aid and sharing resources. My unconventional hobby had brought the community closer together and made it fundamentally stronger. I often thought back to the initial day Mr. Dale confronted me, calling me a doomsday prepper. I smiled. Maybe I was, but I was a prepper who had saved his entire town. The local news ran a special report on my neighborhood's impressive resilience during the blackout, highlighting specifically how the ham radio operator had saved the day. I gave interviews, emphasizing that anyone could learn these essential skills. My story, once privately ridiculed, was now a public blueprint for community survival across the region. I used the opportunity to promote the crucial importance of local, independent communication networks. The national attention was a complete vindication of my passion and years of hard work. I even received a quiet, private apology from the chairman of the HOA board, who admitted they had been pressured by Mr. Dale, but should have listened to my initial warnings about the necessity of the antennas for safety. All the past fines were officially and permanently removed from my record. The final piece of satisfaction came a few months later. Mr. Dale, now fully committed to emergency communications, was the one who led the formal motion at the HOA meeting to officially designate my antenna array as an essential community communication asset, legally protecting it from any future aesthetic complaints. He was proud to personally present the motion, outlining the critical role the equipment played in their darkest hour. He spoke with a sincere conviction of a man who had seen the absolute truth, and his words carried immense weight with the board. The motion passed unanimously. The once maligned hobby was now legally protected and officially respected by every resident. I realized that the ultimate revenge wasn't in rubbing their faces in their mistake. It was in giving them the tools and the necessary understanding they needed to never make that mistake again. I didn't want them to be helpless. I wanted them to be fully prepared and knowledgeable. I learned that sometimes the hardest battle isn't against an obvious enemy, but against the stubborn pride and willful ignorance of those closest to you. My quiet dedication was tested to the extreme, and it survived. The neighborhood, once so sterile and focused only on uniformity, was now subtly characterized by hidden solar panels, small backup generators, and discrete antennae, all symbols of quiet, newfound resilience. Mrs. Henderson continued to bring me cookies every week, but now she brought her grandson too. She wanted me to personally teach him how to use a radio. "You taught us all a crucial lesson, Alex," she told me one afternoon, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You showed us the immense difference between what looks good and what actually is good. We won't forget your kindness." I looked at the young boy, eager to learn. The cycle was continuing, but this time, the passion was being passed down as a valuable, life-saving skill, not a ridiculed eccentricity. My life was quieter now, in a genuinely good way. The heavy sense of isolation was permanently gone, replaced by strong community connection and newfound purpose. I was an integral part of my community, no longer the odd man out. The antennas stood tall and proud against the sky. They were no longer a sign of my difference, but a testament to my unwavering strength and commitment. I looked at the vast network of wires and equipment, remembering the harsh judgment and the dismissive laughter. That judgment had indeed turned into an unexpected lifeline, not just through the vital communication, but through a profound, undeniable truth that emerged when everything else in the modern world failed. I stepped into my communications shed and turned on the main radio. The power grid was reliable again, but the radio network was more active than ever, filled with the clear voices of my neighbors participating in community checks. My unconventional hobby, once universally misunderstood, had saved the very people who looked down on it. It was a victory, not superiority, but a profound, necessary usefulness. I was deeply grateful for the day the world went silent, because it was the day my unique passion finally spoke the loudest.